Hi, everyone. We're Mimicker, here to introduce all kinds of knowledge, even the stuff we didn't know about. Welcome to I Know You Don't Know. Today, we are doing a deep dive into our sources to unpack something that honestly drives us all crazy.
Oh, traffic congestion.
Yeah.
The absolute, the bane of modern existence.
Right. But what if I told you that if just 5% of cars got out of the way of a crash, it could actually cut a massive gridlock traffic jam by nearly 30%. I mean, would you believe me?
It sounds kind of unbelievable, but it's totally real. And it proves that traffic isn't just this simple math problem of, too many cars.
Yeah, it's this incredibly complex emergent property of urban systems, right? It just drains our time, ruins logistics, and even delays emergency services when every second counts.
Exactly. And to even begin dissecting this beast, we have to realize that not all traffic is the same. The sources actually divide congestion into two distinct categories, non-recurrent and recurrent.
Okay, so non-recurrent would be the random stuff, right?
Yeah. A fender bender, a sudden downpour, maybe a blown tire in the middle lane. Temporary events, but their impact is wildly disproportionate.
Which goes back to that stat I opened with.
Right, exactly. If you just reroute a tiny fraction of vehicles, that 5% away from an incident, the entire network recovers so much faster. It stops a localized bottleneck from, paralyzing the whole region.
So for the random chaos, we need immediate interventions. But I kind of want to spend a minute on the other category. The recurrent congestion.
The daily grind.
Right, the rush hour commute. We know it happens because cities have limited space and everyone wants to use it at the exact same time. But what about those jams that just completely defy logic?
The ones where you're creeping along for 20 minutes and then
you just speed up, there's no accident, no construction, nothing, just empty asphalt.
Yeah, that is the dreaded phantom jam. And to understand it, we basically had to stop thinking of cars on a highway as water flowing through a pipe.
Because water particles don't get distracted, right?
Precisely. Traffic flow theorists point out that, vehicles are driven by humans. We aren't predictable particles. We have terrible depth perception, psychology, and most importantly, an instinct to keep a safe following distance.
Okay, let's unpack this with a visual. It's less like a smooth ripple on a pond and more like dropping a stone in a river, but amplified by a giant accordion.
Oh, that accordion analogy is perfect.
Right, because one person on the highway taps their brakes because they sneezed or something, and the person behind them doesn't just match that tap, they brake slightly harder because of their delayed reaction time.
The accordion compresses.
Exactly. And by the time that reaction travels back through 50 cars, the final driver is slamming on their brakes at a dead stop. All because someone a mile ahead slowed down by 5 miles an hour.
Yeah, and there is a brilliant piece of empirical evidence for this. Professor Yuki Sugiyama at Nagoya University actually captured this in a controlled experiment.
Oh, wow. How did he do that?
He put 22 cars on a 230-meter circular track, and the instructions were super simple. Just drive at a constant speed of 30 kilometers per hour, no intersections, no lane changes.
Sounds foolproof. Just drive in a slow circle.
In theory, it should flow perfectly forever. But humans are physically incapable of perfect consistency.
We mess it up.
Always. One driver let their speed drop by just a fraction, or they got a tiny bit too close to the bumper ahead, and that imperceptible disturbance triggered the exact accordion effect you just described.
Just from that one little slip up.
Yeah. Within minutes, a cluster of cars bunched up tightly, and a full-blown stop-and-go traffic jam just materialized out of a thin air.
On a totally empty track. That is wild.
And what makes phantom jams so stubborn is the physics of it. The traffic jam itself, that wave of brake lights, actually moves backward. It propagates opposite to the direction the cars are moving at about 20 kilometers per hour.
Wait, the jam moves backward?
Yeah. Because we are human beings reacting to each other, the system is just incredibly fragile. Once traffic hits a critical density, a single tap of the brakes creates a shock wave that can last for hours.
So if human drivers inevitably create these shock waves, the common sense question is, why don't we just give them more space?
Build a wider pipe.
Yeah, just add more lanes.
Well, it's the most intuitive response in the world. It's also completely flawed engineering logic that has cost cities trillions of dollars.
Trillions? That's insane.
It all comes down to the fundamental law of road congestion. Urban planners call it induced demand.
Okay, induced demand. Let's break that down.
So whenever a city increases road capacity, they actually lower the time cost of driving. You make the trip faster, which effectively makes driving cheaper.
And basic economics tells us that when the price of something drops, demand shoots up.
Exactly. The relief of a widened highway is almost instantly wiped out by a flood of new traffic. And this happens through 3 specific behavioral shifts.
Well, I can definitely guess the first one. If I know they just added 2 new lanes, I'm definitely sleeping in.
Yeah.
I'll shift my commute from like 5:30 a.m. right into the 7:30 a.m. peak.
Boom. That is the time shift. The new lanes invited you back to peak hours. Then there's the modal shift.
Which is what? Changing how you travel?
Right. People who were taking the train or carpooling see the highways moving faster again, so they abandon transit and get back into their own cars.
Oh, that makes sense.
And the third is new trip generation. People start running errands across town or driving to meetings they would have just done over a video call simply because driving feels easier again.
And the sources show the data on this is just staggering. A 1% increase in road capacity historically equals a 1% increase in vehicle miles traveled.
It's a perfect 1-to-1 ratio of futility.
Yeah, the urban planner Jeff Speck even calls highway widening an intellectual black hole.
But departments of transportation just keep pouring concrete.
Okay, I have to offer a genuine challenge here on behalf of the listeners, because it feels so counterintuitive. Even if induced demand fills up the new lanes, aren't we still moving way more cars? Isn't the city's economy better off?
You'd think so, but the Los Angeles case study completely refutes that. LA is the global poster child for trying to pave its way out of traffic.
They've spent decades and billions on freeways.
Right. And if your theory held up, LA would be an economic powerhouse of efficiency. Instead, the overall velocity drops so drastically that the average resident spends 128 hours a year sitting completely idle in traffic.
128 hours, that's just lost life.
And it costs the region about $9.3 billion a year in wasted fuel and lost productivity. The volume of cars doesn't make up for the absolute collapse in system speed.
Which brings up an even wilder concept from the sources. If adding lanes doesn't work, what happens if you try to build a clever shortcut? Just bypass the traffic entirely.
Oh, then you trigger something called Braess's paradox.
Braess's paradox.
Yeah, it's a network theory principle showing that adding a new route to a congested network can actually increase travel times for every single user.
Wait, how does a shortcut make everyone later?
Okay, imagine 2 parallel roads connecting point A to point B. They each take 20 minutes. Now, the city builds a hyper-efficient 5-minute shortcut that connects the halfway points of those 2 roads.
Okay, so I'm looking at my GPS, and it tells me to take the first half of Road 1, use the 5-minute shortcut, and finish on Road 2. It saves me time.
Right, but every other driver on the network makes that exact same, perfectly rational calculation at the exact same second.
Oh, no.
Yes, they all abandon the straight paths and converge on the shortcut. The massive volume completely overwhelms the entrance and exit of that new connection.
You're just funneling everyone into a massive choke point.
Exactly. So a trip that originally took 20 minutes now takes 30 minutes for everyone. It's essentially a multiplayer prisoner's dilemma, where selfish optimization destroys the collective good.
That completely flips how we think about infrastructure. And, I mean, the ultimate proof of this is the Congestion restoration in Seoul, right?
Yes, that project is legendary. The city basically demolished a massive elevated expressway running right through downtown.
And everyone assumed it would cause a traffic apocalypse.
Of course they did. But removing that major shortcut actually forced traffic to distribute more evenly across the smaller capillary city streets.
So without the shortcut to fight over, the whole system got faster.
Exactly. It just proves that treating traffic as a supply shortage is a losing battle. Building roads induces demand, building shortcuts creates paradoxes. We basically have to flip the script.
If we can't increase supply, we have to actively manage demand.
We have to stop treating road space as this free, unlimited right and start treating it as a incredibly valuable commodity.
Which leads us to the economics of congestion pricing, basically internalizing the externality of driving.
That's the core of it. Right now, when you drive at rush hour, you aren't paying for the time you're stealing for the drivers trapped behind you.
You're polluting the road with your car, essentially. And without a fee, you have no incentive to care about the cost you're imposing on everyone else. Congestion pricing forces you to feel that social cost in your wallet.
Singapore was the absolute pioneer here. They realized this back in 1975. Today, their electronic road pricing, or ERP, is completely dynamic.
Dynamic meaning the price changes.
Yeah, the toll rates fluctuate based on real-time traffic volume. They review prices every 3 months just to ensure the roads operate at maximum efficiency.
And it works.
Unquestionably. They see a 15 to 30% reduction in traffic volume and a 20% increase in average speeds.
Wow. And London did something similar, right? The cordon charge?
Yes, an 8.5 square mile zone in the city center. Between 2002 and 2014, they saw a 39% reduction in traffic entering that zone.
But the best part is that up to half of those former drivers didn't just stay home. They shifted to public transit.
And that behavioral shift is the holy grail. But the real hurdle for congestion pricing isn't the economics.
It's the politics. People violently hate paying for roads they think they already paid for with taxes.
Which is why Stockholm is such a genius case study. Getting 70% of your public to support a congestion tax sounds impossible.
So how did they do it?
Through a total masterclass in political maneuvering. The Swedish government knew forcing it through would cause a riot, so they framed it as a trial. In 2006, they set up a 7-month test period.
We're just testing it. You can vote on it later.
Exactly. They completely bypassed the ideological debate because citizens actually had to commute through it.
And they felt the difference viscerally. The sources note a 30 to 50% drop in congestion during that trial.
People were suddenly getting home 20 minutes earlier every day. The abstract anger faded when they saw the concrete data and got their time back. When the vote finally happened, they willingly chose to keep the tax.
So what does this all mean for us? It sounds a lot like surge pricing on ride-sharing apps, right? You pay a premium when demand is high so the service doesn't collapse.
Well, that's a great comparison.
We're even seeing this with high-occupancy toll lanes or HOT lanes, taking those old carpool lanes that sit empty half the day and letting solo drivers buy their way in.
It perfectly blends pricing with behavioral incentives. The toll dynamically adjusts to keep the lane moving fast, but carpoolers still get to use it for free.
Okay, so we've priced the roads to manage demand, but what about the supply side? We can't build wider roads, but can we make the existing roads, smarter?
This is where urban design and smart infrastructure come in. We can optimize our existing grids without pouring any new concrete.
You're talking about AI adaptive traffic signals.
Right. Traditional fixed timing lights are just dumb. They run on predetermined loops, whether they're facing post-game stadium traffic or an empty road at 3 a.m.
But AI signals create these green waves, right?
Exactly. They communicate with nearby intersections to ensure a dense platoon of cars hits green light after green light.
And just to be super clear on how these AI systems actually learn, the algorithms optimize their timing based on the data we collect from intersection sensors.
Yes, like cameras and radar on the poles.
Right, not the data you provide from your personal phone or car. It's strictly observing the physical flow of metal and rubber to predict arrival times at the next light.
And the efficiency gains are massive. When Taipei City rolled out smart signals, travel times improved by 7 to 15%, and intersection delays dropped by up to 20%.
But even with AI, we eventually have to face the geographical reality of why we're all driving in the first place, don't we?
Oh, absolutely, the root cause.
We've spent a century segregating where we live, from where we work and where we shop. If your house is 20 miles from the office and 5 miles from a grocery store, a car isn't a luxury, it's mandatory.
And fixing that requires transit-oriented development, or TOD. It's about building dense, mixed-use, walkable communities right around public transit hubs.
Layering apartments, retail, and offices in one neighborhood.
Exactly. It removes the necessity of the daily drive. And the data shows TOD areas generate 2 to 5 times more transit use than sprawling suburbs.
The symbiotic relationship there is huge. You could build a billion-dollar subway, but if local zoning forces all the surrounding land to be single-family homes with giant driveways, that subway is just going to fail.
Land use and transportation are fundamentally the exact same conversation.
You can't solve one without the other.
Right. It's the most critical insight in modern planning.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the technological frontier. Will autonomous vehicles or flying cars just save us from having to redesign our cities?
Well, it's a mix of tantalizing promises and massive pitfalls. With AVs, they actually target the exact cause of those phantom jams we talked about.
Because they eliminate human reaction times. Goodbye, giant accordion.
Yes, through vehicle-to-vehicle or V2V communication.
Yeah.
They don't just look at the car ahead, they talk to each other instantly.
Like a hive mind.
Right, they call it platooning. Simulations show that if just 40% of cars are autonomous and connected, they could entirely eliminate those backward-traveling shockwaves.
Okay, but I'm going to push back on this AV utopia. If commuting becomes that effortless, if I can just sleep or work on my laptop in the car, won't people just move further away?
You've hit on the ultimate paradox.
Because the time cost essentially drops to zero, right? So we get massive urban sprawl.
It is induced demand, weaponized by technology. People might happily commute 100 miles if they can nap on the way. The phantom jams might disappear, but the sheer volume of new trips would overwhelm the network.
So we just end up in highly efficient, self-driving traffic jams.
Exactly. Privately owned, self-driving gridlock.
Wow. And what about going to the sky? Urban air mobility. The sources talk about these eVTOLs, the electric vertical takeoff aircraft.
Flying taxis. The aviation industry loves this idea, and they're pushing to showcase them at major events like the Paris Olympics. They can bypass ground traffic and save 30 to 50% on commute times.
But they don't pick you up in your driveway and land on your office desk, right?
And there's the Achilles heel, the first mile problem. You still have to drive to a designated vertiport.
Oh, so if hundreds of people drive to the launch pad at 8 a.m.
You haven't eliminated congestion, you've just relocated it. You create a hyper-concentrated traffic nightmare right around the vertiport.
It's all connected. So when we pull all this together, what's the final synthesized realization here?
It comes down to 5 distinct pillars. We have to manage demand through pricing. We have to optimize our supply with smart AI. We must reshape our urban form with POD, invest in transit alternatives, and integrate tech strategically.
We can't just hope a magical gadget will save us.
Exactly. The real question is whether we have the political courage to stop treating roads as a free public good. Will our future be shared, integrated mobility, or just a sprawling dystopia of self-driving traffic jams?
Man, something to really chew on next time you're sitting in rush hour. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. If you enjoyed our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and turn on the notification bell. See you guys.